Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Sports Card Lessons Podcast with me, your host, Ken. I'm a retired teacher bringing you lessons each week I've learned in the hobby. You can find me on Instagram at sportscard_lessons and on YouTube on the Sports Card Lessons YouTube channel. Please like, subscribe, and definitely leave some feedback. Welcome, everyone. How is everyone doing? I'm super excited today for today's episode. Today's guest has been creating content in the hobby for the last 5 years. He hosts Sports Card Nation, Hobby Quick Hits, and Hobby Hotline. Please welcome John Newman. John, how you doing?
Good, thanks, Ken. Man, that's a great introduction. I don't know if I can live up to it, but we'll give it our best shot. Yeah, thanks for having me. This is a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's just start out, man. How long have you been in the hobby? When did you jump in? How long you been doing it?
Oh, it's crazy. I'm gonna. I am old, but I'm gonna make myself feel older. I'll give you the cliff notes and spare everyone the long good diatribe. Started with my first pack, 7 years old, 1979, Topps baseball. Had some Star Wars cards before that, just kind of given to me and playing with them. But really, when I dove in was 7 years old, 1979. Definitely was hooked. Going to a card store almost every day. The owner of that card store said, "John, you're here so much. I'm going to put you to work." So I worked in the card store for a couple years, worked the show circuit with that gentleman. And then, a lot of my friends were like, "John, you should do your own shows. You got like the best cards out of all of us." And I sort of hemmed and hawed, but eventually kind of caved to peer pressure. Got my tax number at 15 years old, did my first show in 87, opened my first store back in 1992 at age 20. Did that for 6 years. And then online and the internet became a thing, and trying to transition to the online sort of thing. And then, like you said, 5 years ago, kind of definitely a different landscape than what we both know now when it comes to content creation and podcasting and YouTube. When I started, I say this, I'm very honest. When I started the podcast, like you said, 5 years ago, Sports Card Nation, there was only 3 or 4 shows, that were doing like consistent content. So the competition pool was wide open. I really always say it. I'm very genuine and honest. I got in when I started doing the show. I got in at the perfect time. Sort of built the following, and because there wasn't a lot of shows, right? So you kind of get in on the ground level, sort of a budding thing, and here we are 5 years later, and it's crazy now, and but it's also fun and great to see everyone sharing their stories, right? The tagline of Sports Card Nation is the hobby is the people, right? Where the common thread is the cards, right? But it's the stories of how we acquire that cards, and the fraternity and the friendships we make along the way and in the process. And so that's the believe it or not, that was the Cliff Notes version of it. But
So I have to say, as a computer guy, I have to imagine 5 years ago, and we know the way the computer industry is always changing, especially with hardware and software. I have to imagine when you started 5 years ago, that software you were using had to been like prehistoric compared to what we use today.
yeah, well, I'll give it. So when I first started Sports Card Nation, it is now a interview every week on Friday. But when I first started it, it didn't start out as such, and so it was just me. And I mean, I didn't even have like a good mic. It was me talking into my phone and recording it. A very archaic, right,
Yeah.
compared to what we know now, right? And talking into my phone. And even when I started doing interviews. My first interview was episode 4, but I really didn't start doing them every week until like episode 20 and 30. And those interviews, and you can tell if anyone goes back, and they were done literally. I had a mic, but I wasn't using StreamYard. So I would put my cell phone on like speaker and put it underneath the microphone. I had like a Yeti, I believe, at the time, and recorded that way. And even editing, I didn't have an editor. So, if someone coughed or sneezed or we lost connection, that stayed in
Yeah.
the, the podcast. Obviously now we have, I use Audacity. I have a Shure mic, and so times are way different. And I always joke, Ken, that I love everyone that listens to the show, but I'm always fearful. Like if someone starts with episode one, like I cringe listening to them, knowing where the show is now. Like my God,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I hope if someone does start with one, I hope they don't just kind of bail too early and see where we've come. If truthfully, if it wasn't a part of the archive, I'd probably delete some of those early ones so no one
Yeah.
can hear them.
No, I
But
know. I
it's part
some
of the history of
so,
the show.
somebody recently pointed out my very first episode. So I did a podcast for the very first podcast I did was with my nephew, and it only was like 7 or 8 episodes. And on the bottom for my name, I didn't even have Ken at Sports Card Lessons. It said Big Ken. So somebody had pointed out one day and messaged me and like, what is Big Ken? Like they went back to episode 1 and I was like, what is that? And I went back and looked. I was like, oh my, I didn't even know I did this. Right. So yeah, I know how you feel about with the early
Yeah.
episodes. Yeah.
Well, we learn, right? We're learning every day.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. So what was the goal? I mean, when you said to yourself, and I know you said, you started at the beginning, but there was there a blueprint that you were following? Was somebody else doing this? Was this your idea saying, I think this is important, I should do this? I mean, what was the inspiration or the goal when you decided to start Sports Card Nation?
yeah, for me that's an easy one. Eric Norton from Beckett Media had a show. He's actually relaunched it called the Fat Packs Podcast. Love the show. At the time when I was listening to the show, I didn't know Eric the way obviously years later here I do now. And so I'm in Syracuse, but originally from New York City. So we'd go to New York City and visit family a couple times each year. And I had my son at the time who was younger, would make the trip a lot of times with me. We'd go to a Mets game, and we'd literally binge listen to Fat Packs. And my son, who knows my hobby history, he's like, Dad, you know as much as Eric, and kid, what you ever thought about doing a podcast like him? And my response is, listen, Eric's great. I'm not gonna be able to do it better. Why even try? He's got it. He's doing a great job. We enjoy listening to him. And my son said, well, your stories would be different than his. You've, lived a different sort of hobby life. And when he said that, I thought about it, but I said, you procrastinate. Like, I don't know, And I had another buddy who worked for ESPN, was down in Orlando doing ESPN radio, was his dream job, loved it. And all of a sudden, I'll give you the shorter end of the story. ESPN start telling them, this is your opinion. This is what the stance you want to take. And he's like, I don't feel that way. And so his dream job became sort of a nightmare because he was sort of playing an actor on the mic. And he told me like, I went from driving into work, loving my job, didn't even look at it as work, to now it's making me ill, almost ill. And so he wound up leaving, came back to Syracuse, and started his own broadcasting company, and built a studio in his basement and did a everyday sports show, not a hobby show, talking about sports. And he knew he was in the cards a little bit, Ken, and he knew I was, big time in the cards. And he's like, I had Fridays off from my job at the time. And he goes, hey, it was supposed to be a one show deal. Like, can you come on Friday, bring some cards? And it was audio and video.
Yeah.
And he's like, bring like 8 cards that are relevant to what's going on in sports now, guys that are doing well, and we'll kind of make that connection. And so we did the episode. It was supposed to be like a one shot deal, and it went great. We got a lot of feedback, a lot of call ins. And later that afternoon, he called me And he goes, "You have every Friday off?" And I'm like, "I do." I said, "I do, Dan." His name's Dan. I said, "I do, Dan, but my schedule could change at any time." He goes, "Would you be willing to do that every Friday and make this like a regular segment?" I said, "I will, long as my schedule doesn't change or I don't have like an appointment I can't get out of, that sort of thing." And so we did that for 25 weeks, 25 Fridays. And then sure enough, my job called me and said, "Hey, you don't have to work all day Friday, but we definitely need you here, 4 hours in the morning." And so I, let Dan know. I said, "Listen, I have to work. If I don't know if you can schedule it in the afternoon, but other than that, I can't make at the time we've been doing it." And he goes, "Nah, I can't change my schedule. That stinks." And then my son, believe it or not, my son Jordan actually filled in for me for about 10 episodes. And he's more of a sports kid, but he does know the cards enough. And he continued that segment for about 10 more weeks, and then he started his college career. And so that was the end of that. And what that show did for me, Ken, was kind of prove that I can do audio and video. Like I was, you always a little self doubt, right, until you actually do it. And it was
Yep.
doing that the 20, 25 weeks or whatever it was. And then when I wasn't doing it, I kind of missed it. I'm like, man, that was fun. And that's when, remembering the conversation in the car with my son Jordan, like, you should do a podcast. That's when kind of Sports Card Nation was born. And 5 years ago.
Wow. And you said you were just by yourself, right? To
Yeah,
start?
by
Yeah.
myself. And when I started, and it was just audio, right? I always joke like I have a face for radio, so the less you see of this, better off
Yeah.
we all are, right? So yeah, I started out really just on the audio side of the house, and then as YouTube got big, everyone's like, put the episode or the interviews on YouTube. I'm not known for my YouTube channel. I'm actually trying to grow it a little bit more. I'm spending a little more time with it, but we're more known for the podcast, the audio downloads, and that sort of thing. But more or less from people saying, "Hey, we'd love to see." There are this as well as I do. There are people that just consume like the video versions of what we
Yeah.
do,
Yep.
and then other people for
And
the
then
other
there's
side.
other people who just listen
Yeah.
in the car. Yeah.
So to
Yeah.
please
And I
kind of both sides of the aisle, that's where the
yep.
video came in later on.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so with the content that you were putting out, so I know myself when I talked about having that little podcast with my nephew for a few episodes, and we talked back and forth, and that was great. And then I decided I was going to do the podcast, and then I had to. And I started out, and those early episodes went for like 45 minutes to an hour. And that's when I discovered like I could literally talk that long about different things, without stopping, or because with the software we have, you can't pause and come back to it. It's a one shot thing. So when you started out and you started doing the content, I heard you just say after about my fourth or fifth episode, I started having guests on. So was it having guests on because you realized it's a lot to sit here and talk, or did you feel like that was better content than what you were talking
I
about?
I think both, Ken. I think
Yeah.
both, right? I mean, listen, I've been in the hobby a long time, so I'm not short of stories or scenarios or things that happen to me.
Mhm.
But I think people like, and if you hear my interviews, then I don't even like call them interviews. I look at them as more conversations. Interviews are sort of formal, right? Like
Yeah.
James Lipton, inside the actor studio. So tell me, I don't. That's not my style. It's much like what you do. Is very, we're just two guys talking
Yeah.
about our experiences.
Yeah.
And it's the biggest compliment I get from people with feedback is I feel like I'm at a bar countertop and eavesdropping in on two people talking about the hobby we all love. And so that was my sort of my style, if you will. I'm not, I joke I'm not classically trained.
Mhm.
It's just, hey, I just talk to the person like I would want me to be talked to.
Yeah.
And Even from guests that I've had, they're like, man, I've done a lot of pods, but I love your style and the way I even when I don't write a lot of questions down, I'll write like three or four down, Ken, and the questions I usually will come from the answers that the guests will have, and
Yeah.
so you're going to be on Sports Card Nation here in a few weeks, and I'll have three or four questions written down, and the rest are going to come from and I think the guest appreciates that most of the time, and I know the feedback I get from listeners is I love that style of conversation rather than where they feel like you're reading off of a script. And listen, I'm 50 years old. I have to write something down, or I will leave something out or forget it. But this, bullet points. But then a lot of the other stuff is going to come from the conversation
Yeah, and
itself.
I do the same thing too, and it's funny
Yeah,
when I have people on the interview, they'll say, "Okay, you're gonna send me a list of questions," and I said, "Well,
yeah,
not really. I mean, I think it's easier if we have like we did, we
yeah,
get on, we have a 20-minute, half an hour conversation, and we get comfortable talking, and then we just hit the record button, right? And then start talking about it. So I have
I
things
love,
that in the
yeah, I
hobby,
love
like
it.
I have questions like, when I'm consuming content and I'm driving down, I'm in the car driving down the road and I'm listening, like what I would ask this person, right?
Yep,
Because that's what I would want to know. So when I'm sitting on this end now with the mic and I'm in this seat, those are the same questions. Like if I was listening to this, what would I ask you? Like from what you just said, what would my next question be? And I
yep.
think people like that. Nobody wants to hear the scripted version of anything.
Yeah, and again, you listen to a show, right? And the guest is talking about something very interesting. You're kind of enthralled, and then the host will ask the question that like goes off in a completely different tangent, and it was like an opportunity like to extend that
Yep.
and again, to each their own. I'm not saying one style's better, just I think like you said, it works kind of for us what the way we do it, but
Yep.
again, that's why different shows do just as well, right? Because some people
Yeah.
maybe are fond of that, nothing wrong
Yep.
with that. It's just I appreciate more of the conversational side than
Mm.
the interview side of the thing. And the other reason I've really brought on guests is just it's more interesting, right? Now you got two perspectives instead of one, and
Yep.
I think it brings a little bit more to it.
Mm. So I know you're a dealer and you set up at shows. I feel like I've been to all the shows in this area, and we've never met. This is our first time meeting. So, uh, couple questions. What's in your case? What do you sell at shows, and where do you set up?
So you do more shows. And listening to you're doing a lot more shows than I am at this point. So we have what's called the Syracuse Fairground shows here in Syracuse, and they're held at, as the name implies, at the New York State Fairgrounds. It's where the New York State Fair is held every year in the summer. So it's a big building. There's about 6 shows a year there, 6 to 8 depending on the schedule. 110 tables for the most part. And then there's what's called the mega show. That's in December, early December, 250 tables. So I do all those. Now, the younger version of me, when I kind of got out of my store and was still selling, I would travel for shows. I'd go to Massachusetts. I've been to Connecticut a couple times, Pennsylvania, even as far as Ohio.
Mhm.
And now in my age and doing the content, I just I can't do it. I'd love to, but it just I can't do it. So I might every once in a while branch out, maybe do an Albany show, Rochester, but most part now those 6 to 8 Syracuse shows, and I've done them so long, people know me. So it's kind of I call it my home show.
Yep.
But if I'm being honest, it's really my only shows that I do now. So and what's
How
in
long?
my case is I'm a vintage guy, and so my PC is vintage uh Hall of Fame graded rookies. So unless I have a duplicate, you probably won't see that. But I have a balance of vintage and modern cards in the case. I try to accommodate all levels. I try to encompass all the hobbies. If you're I have a bargain box there with quarter cards, the $2 cards, $5 cards. Obviously, as you know, you get into the cases and cards can be up to 4 or 5 figures. I don't have a ton, of that, but it's in there. But my bread and butter, where I real is that $20 to $50 card range. That seems
Mhm.
to be my wheelhouse for shows. And I it's nice to sell a 4 figure card, right?
Mhm.
But I always say it's harder. It's harder
Yeah.
to sell because your audience is more limited. Now I've done it. I don't want to sit here like I haven't done it, but it's the old saying, right? The old adage, Ken, right? I rather make 10 $100 sales than $1,000 sale because that you made 10 people happy, hopefully, and then they come back the next show. So
Yep.
my wheelhouse is that $20 to $50 range. I do have expensive cards. They will sell from time to time, but um, you know, uh, I try to have something for everyone between wax, singles, and all different price levels. I don't want someone to come up to my table and say, "Oh man, this is all out of my league," and at the same time, the other side of that coin, right? I don't want to say have someone say, "Oh man, they're all like $10 or under." So I try to find that balance.
I know when I started setting up, I had the same thought pattern. I'm gonna go from dollar cards to, as high a value cards as I could have. And I felt like the work that you have to put in to prepare for a show, it with doing it with that thought
Yeah,
pattern, and especially if you're gonna put wax on your table and everything else, it's a lot of work. There's a
yeah,
lot of preparation that has to go into preparing for the show, and when I started doing that, especially and I was doing 2 shows a month, right? And it was like a whole week of preparation because you had to go through and check all the prices on all the cards. Now, if I was only setting up 6 times a year or something like that, I would say that would
yeah,
work perfectly, but for the amount of times that I'm setting up,
yeah,
I praise my dollar boxes because I always say they pay for the day. They pay for the
yeah,
table, they pay
yeah,
for lunch, they pay for the gas, they pay for all that,
yeah,
but, if I wanna add to my PC or, I wanna move up,
yeah.
I have to sell, something out of the case. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing, here's the crazy thing. But the degree of difficulty for me, I ramped it up a little bit. All my inventory is in alphabetical order. Um, so like my graded cards are from A to Z. My regular, like non-graded stuff is from A to Z, and those it my son used to help me more, Ken. Like pack up at the end of the day. He'd come and he stopped coming. This is a true story. He stopped coming because it takes me I'm so methodical about all right, give me all the Acuna, give me, Aaron, and put he's like, just throw him in the box. Let's get out of here, Dad. And so now what he'll do is he'll wait for me to come home, and then I'll hand him the stuff up, and he'll bring it in the house. But he hates he hates helping me pack up because we can't just throw it in the box. I have to pack it up, and I did that about 4 years ago. I put all my inventory in like alphabetical order,
Mhm.
and it took me about 3 weeks. And when I say weeks, it took me like 3 weekends. And when I say weekend, like 8 to 10 hours each Saturday and Sunday. It took me like 3 whole weekends to get it like that. Once I got it like that, it's not as difficult as I made it out to be because anytime you acquire something new, you just have to put it sort of where it falls in. And then I
Yeah.
have what's called player boxes. So I have player boxes. They're in alphabetical order with tags and all the cards of George Brett will be after George Brett's name tag, and that's in alphabetical order. So if I acquire stuff, it's easier once you do it. And I remember getting about halfway through that process, Ken, and saying, a little voice in your head like, what did I get myself into here? I really, but it was like the point of no return, right? I'm halfway done. I'm was at like L or M. I'm like, I can't stop now, and so I just plugged
Yeah.
through it. But once I did it, it's a lot easier now, and
And
it's a
and
lot easier to find something, right? I make a sale, not at the show, right? Online, eBay, another platform where the
Yeah.
card's here. I can boom find it. I got a Rolo printer. I'm all about like time saving. I want to save as much time as I can. So
And God forbid one of those boxes falls over on the
no,
floor, right? You seen
you,
that a
you
ton of
probably
times.
jinxed me. It's all when it happens. I'm gonna message you and say thanks, Ken. It's all your fault. I've had a couple. No, truth be told, I've had a couple close calls with like the player boxes because they're open because the tags are out, and I
Yeah.
always put them when I'm loading the car up. I always put them on top so they're locked in. But I remember I hit a bump once, and it kind of slid sideways. It didn't tip, but man, it was close.
Yeah.
That would have stunk for sure.
Yeah. I had one experience in New York City. I went down there, did a show with Rob, sports card therapist, and
Yep.
we had a park in the parking garage. So I said, I'm going to leave you the cart. I'm going to go get the car and I'll pull it up. And I got about 10 feet away from him and I heard, oh no. And I turned around and there was just cards all over and it was raining, just cards laying
Oh,
all over the
jeepers.
ground. And of course, it was a 5-row box, of just
Yeah.
singles that hit the ground. And, we're out there and I'm out there in the middle of the pouring rain. I'm picking it up and I'm like, this
Yeah.
is really not going that fast. And I look up and there's Rob with his camera taking pictures of. But before I had all the cards picked up, it was already posted online. So
Yeah, it's a Kodak. It was a Kodak moment.
yeah, yeah. Uh, so look, I know you're a Jackie Robinson guy, and this past summer you recently acquired what I imagine is your Grail card. Um,
It is. Yep.
the
And
you want to
and
go ahead.
yeah, and listen, I'm one thing I know I told you before we even started recording. I appreciate you because you'll talk about mistakes you've made and along with the wins, right? The wins and the losses. I do the same. And the Jackie Robinson 48 leaf is one of my mistakes for many years, right? I've had two, three, probably four opportunities to buy it years ago when it was a lot cheaper at the time than we know it today. And I'd like, I had the Bowman. So, I was like, I'll get it next month or I'll get it next time. And so I kind of kept kicking that can down the road. And I did that two, three times. And then that crescendo hit. And I'm like, man, this is, I love a mulligan, right? Can we go into DeLorean, me and Dr. Emmett Brown and go back into those days, but obviously life doesn't work like that. So last year, 2022, I said, man, it's not going to really get cheaper. Now we've seen kind of prices settle down now, but at the time I'm like, it's not going to get cheaper. Like you're either going to get it or you're not going to get it. And I had just come off like two or three like shows in consecutive months, like really, really good sales shows, really good. And I'm like, you have no excuses, John. And it's funny when you buy. I don't know how you feel when you buy an expensive card, right? You're always like when you buy a card to like put in your showcases and resell or collection or it's easier to do that because like, hey, I'm going to lay out the money today, and eventually, if I buy it right, it's going to come back and I'm going to make some in addition to that. When you buy a card for your PC, no matter what it costs, right? It's a one way. You check it in, but you're not going to check
It's not checking
that
out. Yep.
card out, right?
Yep.
Like I do I would when I would buy this, I wasn't going to ever resell it. Like
Mm,
this was going to be a purchase and you keep it. My son will get it most likely, that sort of thing. And so it makes the purchase sort of difficult. But again, I had those couple that run of two or three shows really sort of really good sales. And I'm like, if you're gonna do it, now is your time or just like close that book. And
mm,
so I really start looking at auctions and trying to get it, and would a lot of times lose in that extended bidding, lose, get sniped at the last minute. And I had, on eBay, I had it in my save like alerts. Anytime a new one went on the the site, it would flag me and let me know, and that's exactly what happened. And it's right here. It's a 1.5, Ken, and I know you're on YouTube, so I'll show it. It might be a
Oh
little
yeah.
glare.
Here, pull it back
Um,
just a little. Says that
yeah,
it's a
there you go.
SGC
One
1.5.
and a half, yeah. And
Yep.
this is very clean card. It's not creased. It's got rounded corners. It's
Yep.
got not a crease, but a little scratch right
Mhm.
there. But if you see this in person, anyone I've shown this to in person is like, I would resubmit that, John.
Yep.
That's even better. And so when I saw it, when it popped up, and the person had it for a buy it now and make an offer. And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to make an offer. Worst thing they can do is say no, decline it, as you know, or come back with a counter offer. So I made an offer. They came back with a counter offer. It was closer to where I wanted to be, and then I made a second counter offer, and I could tell the person was literally, whether it was on their phone or their computer, right there, because all these offers, a lot of times you have to wait a couple
Yeah.
hours. These were like instantaneous. It
Yeah.
almost was like a text chat, and so I made that second counter offer, and literally a minute later, like in my notifications on my front screen, it said, congrats, please pay now.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Yeah. And
holy
that
smoke.
feeling, that moment
Yeah,
right there, right? Your whole
yeah,
body, right? You
yeah,
felt
it's
that.
true. There is a feeling. It's an adrenaline rush. Anyone that says it's not, they either never done it or they're lying, right? And
Yeah.
then and then at first, because when you see those notifications, it doesn't show everything. And I'm like, I'm hoping it's not something else. Like, but I knew because of the time how quick. And then I obviously opened it up and made the purchase. And then you're nervous, right? Like, it's got to go through the eBay at the certification. It
Yep.
actually went through that very quick. Took a week. And then you always worry about shipping it. And the funny thing is, the card that I bought was in the old SGC label, the old green line label. If you're
Yep.
familiar with that,
Yep.
SGC is one of the sponsors of Sports Card Nation, and so I posted a picture of it even before I got it. Like, I purchased my Grail, and SGC, they know, they're like, you got to get that in a new tux. I'm like, all right, they're like, let us know when you get it. We'll figure it all out. And they were great. They were great. So now I had two worries, right? I had to worry till it got to me, and then I had the second three worries in a sense. I had to send it to Boca Raton to get reholdered, and then I had to get it back, right? So
Mm.
you become a nervous Nelly, but it all's well that ends well, and
Yeah.
I have it, and it's nice. I waited too long, truth be
Yeah.
told.
But could you
I could have,
imagine?
for
Could
what
you?
this cost, for what this cost, Ken, I could have had those three that I punted on, and you
Yeah.
know what I
Yeah.
mean. But
But you grew up in Brooklyn, right? So, or
correct.
the
Yep.
Brooklyn. So, could you imagine growing up that that card, his card, would be a grail to so many people? I know you probably thought yourself, but um, nobody could have ever known where how where that card was going to go.
No,
And
and I always, even the times when I said, like, I just said, I'm gonna pass right now. I'll get it. In my mind, I'm like, I'll get it another month, another day, another year. Right? You don't realize, like, times change. The hobby's changing. Just because it's one price today doesn't
yeah,
mean it's going to be, as we all know, right? And so it's one of those, in hindsight, not one of my finest moments as a collector slash dealer. But that's when I decided I better, plus I'm getting older. If I'm going to get it, right, I want to have more time with it and enjoy it. I don't want to get it, if I even make 65, buy it when I'm 65 and have it for 5 years. I'd rather buy it now and enjoy it for a longer period
yeah,
of
yeah,
time, right? We forget about that too sometimes.
yeah, yeah. The longer we own it, the more we get to enjoy it. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
for
Yeah.
sure.
All right. So, talk to me a little bit about the difference between your shows. I know you have Sports Card Nation, you have Hobby Quick Hits. Um,
Yeah.
Talk to me about the difference of those two, and yeah, just
Yeah. So Sports Card Nation, like we, started 5 years ago. Initially, was not an interview show. Wound up morphing into a weekly, every Friday interview show, and built up quite a following. And I'd get feedback. Love the show, John. Love your guest. But some of the people remembered like Sports Card Nation in its earliest incarnation, where it was just me. Have
Mm.
you ever considered doing a show where you just pick a topic and give your opinion like you used to do? We sort of missed that. And I got a couple of those, Ken, and I'm like, just a couple, I appreciate them, but just a couple of the original folks missing that. And then that started, I started to get more of that. And the other thing is when you do an interview show, right, those tend to be, an hour, if not, or longer. And I had some episodes that were eclipsing 2 hours, and that's long. That's long in the even for those days. That's a long episode,
Yeah.
and so people were like, "Hey, we missed kind of the like your show's great now, but we really kind of missed what it started out with." And I started to at first I just kind of resisted and I said, "All right, it's a couple people, I get it." But then I started getting more of that from people I didn't really know or weren't getting always feedback, and that's where Hobby Quick Hits kind of got born. Um, and I wanted to do what happened. I wanted to make it a shorter show, hence quick hits, right? I didn't want it, it's just me. It's not a guest. It's going to be me tackling a topic, giving my 2 cents on it, and kind of like a fire, right? You get in, get out, say good night, thanks everybody, and that's really what it was. And then the format changed a little bit between the two, and I've moved segments between the shows, and my goal with content, and I don't always hit it, but I want to keep even Sports Card Nation. I try to keep around an hour or less. On Hobby Quick Hit averages about 20-30 minutes, and I do a pretty good job on both sides. Every once in a while, we'll have a longer one. I don't shortchange guests. In other words,
Yeah.
I don't. Okay, that's all the time. If we're talking about something interesting, but I tried. It's just a gut where we're at time wise, and I've done a better job. And both shows usually are under an hour now. Hobby Quick, it's almost always under an hour easily, usually
Yeah.
20-30 minutes. And even Sports Card Nation, I got down to hour and 10 minutes. And I
Mm.
think I've looked at like the demographics report since we've done that. It's been even better. Like
Mm.
so, I think sometimes I think most people they did a study. I posted something a couple weeks back that podcast they did a survey of podcast listeners, and most people said that like they like a show that's an hour or less. I mean, that's just
Yep.
you know, I've
Yep.
listened. I like shows that could be more, but
Yep.
that's the general consensus, the majority. And so I was doing. I tried to do that even before I kind of saw that survey or that report. But a lot of as you know, a lot of content is consumed on commutes to work or at the gym, and generally,
Yep.
those are between 30 and 60 minutes. And so
Yep.
that's sort of that target point
That
if you and
that
that's
that
really
sweet.
how why Hobby Quick Hits was born. It was kind of I almost say demanded, right? The listener say, hey, do a show again with just you. Like we love guests, but we also just want to hear your opinion sometimes too. And that's it sort of was born just by demand. And at first, the one mistake I made, Ken, when I launched Hobby Quick Hits, at first I'm like, I'm gonna launch it on its own platform and as a completely different show. And it did okay, but nowhere near like Sports Card Nation. And then I did like 40 episodes like that. And the light bulb finally went on above my head. Like, why am I like launching it as like a complete look? Just put it on a different day on the same platform. So the people who are already following it and the same people who demanded they want to see a show
Yeah.
like
Now
that,
you're giving
they
it to
don't
them.
have to look in two locations, right?
Yep.
I
Yep.
don't know why it was dumb on my part not to do that from the jump. But that's we make mistakes and then we fix them. So
I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when you sat down and said, "Okay, I have to come up with guests for the next year," every a weekly
Yeah,
guest. Because I mean, starting 5 years ago, I mean, I think today, because so many people are
yeah,
making content like myself, it's easier to be able to find people. But I would have to imagine
yeah.
5 years ago, it wasn't as easy to find guests to come on.
I use the word chase. I was chasing people. Like, hey man, what are you doing? Like, you want to come on the show? What's your show, right? And then when you start any show, right, you're not really known. You're like, who are you? You know, what do you do? What is it? What does it entail? And so I went from what I call chasing, like almost begging people to come on. Now it's, I guess it's a good problem to have, Ken. Like you said, now you there's more people in the hobby, more people doing content. It's easy. My problem now is you get sort of backlog 2 3 months. So when someone wants to come on, I'm like booked till March. I'm almost like a doctor, right? You can't get an appointment, and I hate that because that's not my mo. I'm a people person. The hobbies, but I just and I want to keep it to 2 episodes a week with those two shows. I could
Yeah,
do but I think there's sort of an oversaturation point too, and I don't I try not
yeah,
to cross that. So I try to do my best, with scheduling and most people. 99% of the people that come on understand that and are very like understanding of. I never get yelled at too bad, but it's night and day. You go from like emailing people and messaging them on social media, and now people will hey, can I come on the show? Right? You go from one element to the other, but
yeah. You go from
it's
chasing
I
to
like it now because
yeah,
I that chase sometimes can be a grind too
yeah,
and frustrating at times, and so if you're asking me the choice between the two, I like where I'm at now
yeah,
rather
absolutely.
than scrambling for somebody.
Yeah. Who or what inspires you in the hobby?
The hobby itself, I know that might sound like a cop out answer, right? But I mean, just everything in the hobby, right? The great people in it. We hear about a lot about the bad stories, and I talk about them on my content, just to be informative, right? Well, for every one of those negative stories, right? There's 10 great ones of someone lost their collection in the fire, and the hobby rallies and replaces all that stuff and then some, right? Or somebody's sick and they do a fundraiser kind of with cards at the centerpiece of that. And so like Dr. Beckett says, this is the greatest hobby in the world. I'm going to agree with him. And it's the hobby itself, right? It's the great people that are in this hobby. And there's more great people than not great. And that's what inspires me, right? To be a small part of that and contribute in some form or fashion in my own way. And even with my show, I've had a 7-year old kid to a CEO, right? We're all put our pants on one leg at a time, and we're all, I always joke, right? There's no pension plan if you got in the hobby 3 years ago or you got in the hobby 40 years ago, like I did. I'm no better than that
Yeah,
person, whether you got in yesterday
yeah,
or not, right? We're in this fraternity together, and I wish more people. I think there is an element where there's a little bit of get off my lawn from some people, right? That hey, I was here first. You don't know as much as me, yada
yeah,
yada, that sort
yeah.
of
And
thing.
there's
It's never
labels.
been
Yeah.
labels. I'm not a labels guy,
I just listened to
you
your
know.
episode talking about,
Yeah.
different descriptions and labels of people and
Why do we have to like? We're just hobbyists, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like some, I get it. Hey, I'm a high end collector. I collect vintage, right? That's describing what you're looking to acquire or keep, right?
yeah,
That I get, but some of the terms that are sort of have a derogatory term to me anyway, like
yeah.
new money or when people I was new in 1979, right? We all were new.
Yeah,
We were all new at some point when we first
yeah.
got in the
But
hobby.
the
And
money I'm
if
bringing
we
into the
look,
hobby is always new, right? I'm getting paid this
yeah,
week, and that's I'm putting this money, or whatever I did,
Yeah, and
whether
if
I made it in the hobby or I made it at work, and I'm spending it on the
yeah,
hobby. So it's yeah,
and if
absolutely.
you love the hobby and are passionate about it, like I
Yeah,
believe both of us are, we need people in the hobby, right? If we took the stance, oh, we were here first, this is, get off my lawn type guy, right?
yeah, yeah.
That's a recipe for disaster,
Mm.
because people are going to leave, less transactions, less business going on. And I don't even care. Someone will say, John, well, I don't sell my cars. I'm not worried about the transactions going on. Well, you really should be, because that's the lifeblood of the hobby, whether you sell or not. And there's nothing wrong with not selling, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I've heard two terms. I've heard, Ken. I don't know. Purist and true collector. I don't even know what that means. What's a true collector?
Well,
Someone told me once. Yeah,
I was
someone
gonna
told me
say,
once.
I think when people say I'm a collector, it's almost sounds sexy in the hobby, right?
Yeah,
Like
I
it,
don't
it's just
sell my
it's just a
cars.
great where I'm so much above, but we're all collectors, right? I just did an
Yeah, we are.
episode on this collector, flipper. I mean,
Yep.
if I set up at shows, right? So you could call me a flipper, but I call myself a dealer, right? Because I have a business
Yep.
plan, right? I need to sell. I mean, I'm here, I need to pay for my day.
That's
I need to,
another term. That's a flipper, right? Using a sort of
yeah,
what's wrong really, what's wrong with that, right? That's
yeah,
being an entrepreneur, right? People buy houses. Obviously they're not flipping them the next day. They gotta like fix them up and
yeah,
renovate them, right? But they're trying to do that as fast as they can to
yeah,
get that house on the market and flip it. They make TV shows about it, and millions of people watch them and admire those folks and
yeah,
as celebrities.
yeah,
Um, and sort of look up to them and admire them, and they're business folks, right?
yeah,
And you know, I guess there's certain people that don't like the business aspect of the hobby, and that to each their own. But I just don't, you know, I don't know what a true collector is, because I someone said you're not a true collector, John, and I said, all right, I don't fly. I said, well, why not? Why are you saying that? What's the rationale? Well, you sell some of your cards, okay, but I also have cards that don't ever go to the show with me. They're in this room and they never leave this room. I'm collecting those. Well, I feel like, and this is the response. I feel like if you sell any of your cards, you're not a true collector. I'm
mm,
like, is that your rule, or is that like a real rule? Like I said, I'll politely disagree with you. I think if you keep cards, and I don't care if you keep one card, you're a collector. And so
yeah,
I don't know why we have to put these tags on people. I think it's just a bad thing. I think it rubs people the wrong way. It bothers, it bothered me a little bit being told I'm not a true collector. I didn't lose any sleep over it, right? And then
yeah,
I hear another term I'm starting to hear more of is purist. I don't even know what that means. I kind of know the true collector side of the thing. But what's a purist? Like, I think some of the new folks are saying, like, if you were in the hobby a long time and your resistance to changing along with the hobby, you're kind of like the old man on the porch. I don't know. I've changed. I've changed in 40 years how I do things and how
yeah.
I
I mean,
look
as
at
the
things. So
hobby
I don't
changes,
even know
we have
what that means.
yeah, as the hobby
So when
changes,
I
we
hear
have to
pure,
change, right?
yeah, and if you ask somebody like that uses the term, like, what's that mean? You'll get this long-winded answer that
Yeah,
really doesn't clear up the question, right? It just confuses you more. And that's where I go, like, to each their own, right? But I like to welcome everybody rather than start putting people in boxes, and you're this and
yeah,
you're that. You're in this compartment, you're in this department. Like that's not very warm. That's not very welcoming. And regardless if you an old school hobbyist has been in, like, we need the new people to keep this going forward. And
yeah.
again, we're not going to be here forever, right? We need that next uh
Next generation.
passing of the torch.
Yep.
We need that next generation to carry it forward, and the generation behind them as well. Without them, because if that stops, this hobby will stop. It's not going to happen. I'm speaking in hypotheticals, but we need we need as all the people we can have. And even if you don't sell cards, Ken, and that's another thing. I don't know if you've gotten this with doing shows. I think there's a negative connotation with some people who do sell, whether it's at a show or online, that they're looked at, to some. Again, I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but to some, it's looked at sort of negatively, like you're only in the hobby for dollar signs. No, I'm in the hobby because, when I started in 1979 as a 7-year-old kid, I wasn't in the hobby for dollar signs, right? You get older, you amass this massive collection, and you realize you can help other people add to their collection and fund your own hobby, as you said, right?
Yeah.
Money doesn't grow on trees. So if I can sell something and then put the money back in the hobby and buy
Mhm.
something that I like, and someone else gets something they like, it's a win-win. So I don't get the negative
Mhm.
connotation on selling. And quite frankly, even for hobbyists who don't sell, the selling aspect of the hobby is actually important to them. They may not acknowledge that or realize it, but it really is, because those transactions are the lifeblood of the hobby. Whether it's at an LCS or
Mhm.
at a table in a banquet hall, makes no difference. It's
Yeah,
it's
and that
it's a
sale
transaction.
that that sale you're making could be fulfilling somebody else's dream, lifelong
Yeah,
dream of acquiring that particular
yeah,
card. So it's not only that just that you're making a sale, but you're helping somebody else, fulfill something that, they wanted, that they've looked for in their life to put in their collection. And when I hear that, when I make a sale, when somebody comes and they'll see a card and they'll be like, "Oh, this has been the card I've been chasing for so long," and
yeah.
we work out a deal and they take it. I feel good about that. I feel good that,
Yeah, it could
not
make you show. And
yeah,
and I'm not even just talking about the financial aspect, just the fact that you had that impact on that collector,
yeah,
right? They added something that maybe they couldn't find at the price they wanted to pay, and you make it happen. Like, I just don't get I don't want to say hate, but sort of the disdain for people who sell cards. Like, I think it maybe comes from a place of jealousy. Again, I hate painting with a broad brush. I think some of that comes from that space, but it is what it's an important part of the hobby. Continuing to go forward, people adding, as you said, cards to their collection, and then in turn, right, you add something that you want to add to your PC. It's a circle cycle, right, and
yeah,
important, because that cycle, that circle gets broken. The hobby starts to fail, right, or
yeah,
not do as well.
yeah, yeah,
I never hear the hobby's dead. The hobby's dead, folks. I always get a chuckle out of that.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah,
no.
yeah. So look,
So
as we wrap up here, 174 days till national.
yeah, I'm counting them down.
Uh, I've heard a lot of times on your, a lot of your content, especially going up to last year. Everybody counting down the days for nationals. So I thought I'd be the first
Yeah,
to throw it out there to you. Uh, but you'll be in Chicago this year for national.
yeah. I'm all booked. Hotel. I'm gonna be. I do another show now too called Card Matches with my friend Danny Black,
Yep.
and that's alternate. So Hobby Quick Hits will be one Monday, and then the following week Card Matches, and so we alternate Monday. So Danny Black, we're gonna hang out at the National Room together. He's gonna be driving from Baltimore. I'll be flying in from Syracuse to Chicago, and we'll have his car, and we'll bop around that way, and it's gonna be fun, right? And I've heard I refer to the national as the Super Bowl of the hobby, right? That's like the Super Bowl weeks coming up here in real time, right? For
Yep.
for the NFL, right? Everybody's there, right? Celebrities, people in the NFL, retired people,
Yeah.
anyone that's anybody in sports or the NFL is there, and that's kind of how I look at the national, right? It's that week you circle on your calendar every year. I've heard it called the largest family reunion.
Yeah.
I get a kick out of that connotation, right? And as much it is about getting some cards, and that's what I go to acquire a couple, cards for that Hall of Fame graded PC. It's also, it's that week you get to meet everyone every year, whether it's for the first time, like in our case, or again for a multiple time. And you can't put a price on stuff like that. And and here's the crazy thing, Ken. For as long as I've been in the hobby, the first national I went to was what was it, 2018,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
so I was late to the national party, if you will.
Yeah.
When I was younger and doing shows and had the store. And the other thing, in my defense, the national then is not the event we sort of know it as today. It was great. I don't want to, but it was sort of just a gigantic show. And I was already sort of doing shows. And so I couldn't justify the travel cost and the time away from, but now it's an event beside the show.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now you got content creation going on. You've
Mhm.
got all these new companies, networking. You've got meetups and it's just so much going on. It's something for everyone.
Yeah.
If you're in the hobby and you go to national and you don't have a good time, you did something wrong. I don't know
I'll tell you,
what happened.
if you go, it's an addiction, right? You're just like, I know. My first national was last year, and I set up at national.
Yeah.
So I went to the national my first time. I had a table, but I also walked it almost every day. I walked in it, and even before I left, I was already thinking about next year, like the
Yeah.
what I'll do
Yeah.
different and how I'm going to do it, and I'm going to stay a
Yeah.
little longer, and I'm going to do this and that. So yeah, it's like one of those things. Once you're there, once you've done it, no matter it doesn't matter what aspect you did it. Everyone I've talked to is like, yeah, I don't care what happens. I'm going next year. Yeah. So,
Every year it's summer school time. I'm a TA, and they asked me to teach summer school, and I'm like, I'll be there, but you see these 3 days right here, I
yeah.
won't. And so
Yeah.
if you can, I'll be there the 4 other weeks minus these 3 days, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And if they said no, they don't. But if they said, John, like, if we can't give you those 3 days off, I'd be like, I'll see you
In
in
September.
September when school starts
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
Uh, but they're accommodating. That's great. And I've only been in that 2 years. My previous job, it was tough sort of getting that time off. But
Yeah.
it's a great event, and I always tell people. And I remember, in 2018, I'm going to ask you a question, even though it's your show, right? You never been, right? You're going to your first one, and everyone's telling you, "Oh man, it's like this. You got to do that." They're giving you all this helpful tips and advice, right? Until you can take all that advice and all those tips in, and then you get there. Whatever you envisioned in your mind, not being there yet, and then you get there, it's even beyond that. Even for
It's even
me,
better.
who was in the hobby a long time, I thought I kind of know what this is going to be like, and then you walk through the doors, and it's like even beyond that,
Yeah.
and even now going, what, 4 times now. Um, it's still you're like a kid in a candy store, right? You count, like you said, you count down the days,
Yeah.
and you look forward to, and that's the quickest week, right? It just seems to go by in a blur, and then it ends, and like you said, you're like 365, 364,
Yeah.
363,
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
we look forward to it, and I'm looking forward to meeting you in person and shaking your hand, and all that good stuff, and many others, as you well know. And it's a great time.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely, John. So look, tell everyone where they can reach out to you, where they can listen, where they can watch.
Yeah, I'll make it pretty easy. I won't be long winded. If you Google Sports Card Nation, all that stuff that will come up will be all where you can find the shows, social medias. I do another show. I'm part of a conglomerate of content creators. It's called Hobby Hotline. We do 2 shows a week. That's Tuesdays and Saturday mornings. The Saturday morning show is on Bench Clear Media Network, and on Tuesday night, that's on the Hobby Hotline YouTube channel, and that's got, I think there's 17 or 18 of us. We take turns, so it's not always the same 3 people, and tackle the hobby. It's a call-in show, so anyone can come on the screen and tell us we're wrong or tell us we're right or talk about whatever they want to. And it's real fun to do. And Dr. Beckett is part of that group as well. And anytime, that gentleman has forgot more hobby than most of us know. And so to pick his brain and getting to know him over the years now, and it's just been a fun time. And so there's that show too. You can just Google Hobby Hotline. That'll come up as well. So
Great. All right, John, thank you so much for coming on. This has been great, and I'm looking forward to coming on your show in a few
yeah,
weeks, and
yep,
definitely looking forward to meeting you, if sooner, if not at National this year.
yeah, no doubt. And like you said, and I mentioned earlier, Ken will be coming on here on Sports Car Nation in a couple weeks. I look forward to continuing our conversation.
Great. Thanks, John.
Thank you.